Hey everyone, welcome to the video. This is going over the 6-game NBA slate for tonight on Draftkings, and it's actually a pretty good slate. There's 2 games that really stand out to me, so I'm going to be looking to attack those 2 games in general. Anyway, before we continue, if you guys could leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out. Really appreciate it. You can also follow me on Twitter at ChrisPennell16, and if you're interested in the spreadsheets I build every single night for the NBA season, my up-to-date cheat sheet, my projections, all the color-coded statistics, and the defense versus position chart, as well as my Discord chat. Links in the description below for my Patreon. And without further ado, I say we get right into the slate. So the 2 Lakers are the most expensive guys on the slate, and to be honest, I really don't have too much interest in either of them. It's a tougher matchup versus Indiana, so I just think there's better spots on this slate than to spend up for one of the Lakers. Do they probably have the highest ceilings on the slate? Yes, but just the way the slate is, I'm looking at a lot of more mid-range options, and if I'm going to spend all the way up, I do prefer Trae Young here at 9,900. You get some slight savings off the 2 Lakers studs. And I just really like them in this matchup here versus New York. And you get to save a little bit of salary as well. We have a 222 point over-under here with a tight 2-point spread. So this should be a pretty good game for fantasy purposes. And New York isn't too bad defensively, but they do rank 19th versus point guards. And I do like his upside in this matchup. New York does play extremely slow, but Atlanta should look to push the pace here. And Young is averaging 1.36 points per minute with a 34% usage rate. Now, the problem with Trae Young is his floor is a little lower than I'd like it to be, but I do love his ceiling, and trust me, I'm not one to play this guy. I think I've played him like once or twice this season, and it hasn't worked out either time, so I'm not really a fan of playing Trae Young, but I do think I might make an exception tonight if I do have the salary. And like I said, his floor's a little low, but the ceiling's incredible. He did have 50 points last game, then 46, then he had some 30-point games, so then he had 60-point game versus Brooklyn, 33 points versus Golden State, then 52 versus Houston. So he can be up or down, but I do think he should have a pretty good game here versus New York. So definitely do not mind playing Trae Young tonight if you're going to spend all the way up. Kawhi Leonard, he's okay at 9,400. Not really having a ton of interest in him, just because I do worry about this 12.5 point spread. I just think there's better options on this slate, just point per dollar wise. But I do like the over-under. It's a 227 total, which is second highest on the slate, and the Clippers do have 120 team total, which is the highest on the slate. So points are going to be scored in this game. I just worry about this game getting to maybe a little bit out of hand, and Kawhi Leonard doesn't really have to do much. But again, I love going off the basis of a team's going to blow someone out, because if they don't and the game stays close, he'll probably have a pretty big game here. And the same could be said versus Washington. I mean, they still won by 16 points, but he still had 58 fantasy points. So even if they do blow these guys out, I shouldn't say blow them out, but even if they win by a sizable margin, I think he'll still be fine on a point per minute basis. And both teams play pretty fast here. Both are top 10 in pace of play. So I don't hate the matchup here versus Phoenix. Not the worst defensive team in the world, but Kawhi Leonard should have a pretty solid game here at 9,400. I don't mind Kawhi. And exactly what I said can be said. The same exact thing can be said for Paul George here. He's just a cheaper version of Kawhi Leonard, and he's got insane upside. He's also got some downside as well. We saw 27 points versus Toronto, but you guys had some big games. He's also had some clunker of games, so not someone I'm really too interested on this slate. But I do like the price tag of 8,800 on Paul George. But getting into some of my favorite plays, they're going to be in the 7K to 8K range. I love Brandon Ingram. He is one of my top plays on the entire slate. And this is by far the best game of the slate. I said earlier in the video when I did my intro that there is 2 games that stand out in the slate. One's the Atlanta versus Atlanta versus New York game, and the big one is the Brooklyn versus New Orleans game. This game should be amazing for fantasy purposes, and I'm going to look to stack this game up. I want as many pieces from it as I can get. We have a 229.5 point over/under, which I actually think just rose to over 230. So the total is even rising, and it wouldn't surprise me if this got up even a little bit more when game time starts. Both teams are also top 10 in pace of play, while New Orleans is 4th and Brooklyn is 10th. And Ingram has scuffled of late. If you look at his points, 39, 39, 40. I mean, it's not like terrible, but I'd expect a little bit more from Brandon Ingram, but it's not too bad. It's not like he sucked. But I like his chance to bounce back in a big way. I think he gets 45 to 50 points in this matchup, and he owns a 29% usage rate, 1.26 points per minute. Brooklyn's not the best defensive team in the world, so Brandon Ingram, I want exposure to this game, and he's pretty much got the highest ceiling of anybody else in this game, so do like Brandon Ingram quite a bit here versus Brooklyn. And then keeping the same energy with the New Orleans Pelicans here, I love Jrue Holiday in this matchup. Another favorite play of mine today, and I'll more than likely be locking him in. He's fresh off a 50-point outing where he played 40 minutes, 4 for 7 from 3, 29 real-life points, 8 assists, 4 rebounds. He pretty much does everything in the stat sheet, and again, this game environment is going to be amazing for fantasy purposes. We have a high total, close spread. It's going to be a fast-paced game. Brooklyn's 27th versus point guards. And on the season, he's got a 25% usage rate with 1.12 points per minute. Jrue Holiday, I think, is a fantastic play, and especially as a point guard versus Brooklyn, they struggle mightily versus point guard. So definitely like Jrue Holiday a lot on this slate. Another guy I'm going to be more than likely locking in, Spencer Dinwiddie. He's just on the opposite side of this game. Gotta like Spencer Dinwiddie today. I expect him to be very popular, and it's for good reason. And the three guys I just talked about are pretty much my three favorite plays on the slate: Ingram, Holiday, and Spencer Dinwiddie. And they also don't break the bank either, so that's what I do like about those three guys as well. And I just like getting exposure to this game here. This is a perfect spot for Dinwiddie. New Orleans is the fourth worst defensive unit in the NBA right now for fantasy points given up, and they're also dead last, ranked 30th versus point guard, so Spencer Dinwiddie should eat here. He's at a usage rate well over 30 with no Kyrie Irving and Karis LeVert, and he's been one of the safest plays every single game that he ends up playing, so I definitely like Spencer Dinwiddie here. He's averaging over 1.2 points per minute, and if you just look at his game log, you pretty much get a safe bet of 40 points at the upside of more. He did have 34 versus Philly, only played 30 minutes though. Then 43, 40, 39, 38, 40, 44, 65. Wouldn't surprise me if he got close to 65 in this matchup as long as he's hitting. He was 6 for 8 from 3 in that game. And then 38, 43. He's very safe. He's not going to bust more than likely. So Spencer Dinwiddie, one of my favorite plays on the slate. The price finally came down. This is the cheapest he's been since, like, at least in the last 10 games. So definitely like the price decrease on Spencer Dinwiddie. Kyrie Irving's not going to be back for this game, so gotta love Spencer here. One of my favorite plays on the entire slate. Scrolling down a little bit, DeAndre Ayton's going to make his first game back. I can't imagine he's going to get a full like 35 minutes. I probably get about 30 minutes. He's probably going to get over a point per minute. Not a terrible matchup versus the Clippers, but I'll just take a wait and see approach on him, see how he's used. I don't really think he's a must on this slate anyway. I think there's better plays for a little bit cheaper. Like, I'd rather play Julius Randle, who's a little bit cheaper. He comes in at 7K, and I think he's a pretty good solid play. He's coming in on good form, 48 points, 43 points, 36 points, not too bad. And this is my second favorite game of the night for fantasy purposes, given the tight spread and a decently high total. And I also like the pace-up spot for New York here, as they are 28th in pace of play, but Atlanta is 8th, so I always like getting guys in pace-up spots. Atlanta is also the second worst defensive unit this season for fantasy points given up, and they're 16th versus centers. On the season, he's got a 26.3% usage rate and over a point per minute. So if he's going to give me 35 plus minutes in this matchup, I think he can hit 40 points pretty easily. So do like Julius Randle quite a bit in this game. And it would make sense to play Trae Young if you're playing Julius Randle. You don't have to, but it'd be a nice correlation stack. Just, I think Julius Randle's going to be the high point scorer for the Knicks, and I think Trae Young's going to be the high point scorer for the Atlanta Hawks. So if you think that game stays close and shoots out, wouldn't hate the idea of using both of those guys. Harrell's not a bad option. Versus Phoenix, we know DeAndre Ayton is not the best defender in the world, one of the worst. And he had a huge game versus Chicago. I wouldn't hate the idea of using Harrell. It's not a core play for me on this slate, but if you have 6,900 left, there's no reason that you can't really go to Harrell. He's been pretty good this season. Not a core play for me though. But Jarrett Allen, I do like Jarrett Allen quite a bit at 6,400, and he's always the perfect GPP play because he can be pretty boom or bust. 19 points, 22 points, 40 points, 38 points, 35 points, 50 points. I was all over Jarrett Allen versus that Atlanta game. And 22, 35, 42, 62. He's a pretty boom or bust guy, but I think this could be a boom game for him. And he had 2 tough games recently, which can explain his terrible outings. And he only had 22 minutes and 25 minutes. But I just love the pace in this game, and he should be able to rack up the blocks and boards, hopefully get some steals. New Orleans is pretty below average versus centers this season. Now, he's not going to be a huge minutes guy. He's never going to get like 35 plus minutes. Usually getting about 28 to 30 minutes per game, and he's been over a point per minute this season, 1.15 points per minute. So Jarrett Allen, if you're just game stacking this up, I have no reason not to like him. I think he's going to pretty easily get a double-double here. Hopefully get a couple blocks, and I think Jarrett Allen's a pretty good play at 6,400. I expect him to have some ownership on this slate. Marcus Morris, I just hate playing Knicks, but he is pretty cheap, and if you just want exposure to that game, I wouldn't hate the idea of using Marcus Morris here. He did have a huge game recently where he had versus Golden State. It went into overtime, but he had 36 minutes, 62 fantasy points, and of course I played him in the game versus Portland where he had 12 fantasy points. He was chalk though, but of course I played him in that game. Next game he gets 62, but that's just how fantasy works. I think he's a safe bet for 25 plus points versus Atlanta, and they are dead last versus, or no. I can't remember exactly. I think Atlanta is like dead last versus small forwards and power forwards, so pretty sure. So I do like the matchup from Marcus Morris, and I wouldn't call him a core play at 6,200, but he's an okay play. If he was in the 5K range, I think he'd be a really good point per dollar option, but he's still a pretty solid point per dollar option if you only have 6,200 left. Scrolling down the list, here's some more. We have TAUREAN Prince, who I think is one of my favorite plays on the slate at 5,500. Again, no surprise, he's part of this Brooklyn-New Orleans game, but I just want to get pieces from this game. And he's a boom or bust guy, but he tends to perform pretty well in these pace-up spots versus bad defenses, and that's what we're going to get tonight. And, you know, the guy's got upside as well. He had 36 points versus Toronto, 32 versus Denver, 31 versus Charlotte, 42 versus Atlanta. I can see him having close to an Atlanta game, although that was a revenge game. But, you know, he's been pretty good this season, 0.89 points per minute, which isn't too bad. And Atlanta is 30th versus power forwards and centers. Not Atlanta, I'm sorry, New Orleans. Oh, so that's what I was talking about. I was looking at my notes for Marcus Morris when it comes to Atlanta. But no, actually, New Orleans isn't the absolute bottom barrel defense when it comes to small forwards and power forwards, but they're also not that great either. They're below average when it comes to points given up. So I don't mind TAUREAN Prince. It's not a bad matchup or anything, just not as good as Atlanta's matchup. As I was getting that mixed up with Marcus Morris. But TAUREAN Prince, I think he's an excellent play on this slate. I do expect him to be popular, and he's someone I'm going to be looking to get in my lineups. Scrolling down the list here even more. Where was he? He was 5,500. So we could, Rashawn Holmes, he's cheap, and he's got a great matchup versus Charlotte. They just continue to get killed down low versus centers. But it's hard to trust the guy. He does like to foul. He had 4 fouls versus New York, 5 fouls versus Golden State. Only had 19 fantasy points and 9 points versus New York. Although I thought he played Charlotte recently where he had a pretty good game, but I guess not in the most 10 recent games. But the guy's got upside. He's been around a point per minute this season. Great matchup versus Charlotte. I just don't love this game from a fantasy perspective, but if you had to one-off it, I wouldn't mind Rashawn Holmes. Just not one of my favorite plays on the slate. I'd just rather get exposure to this New Orleans-Brooklyn game if I'm going for pieces down low. Like, Joe Harris at 5K. I'd probably rather play Joe Harris just because I like this game environment a lot better. And the guy, pretty good three-point shooter. A couple games where he was 1 for 6, 1 for 8, but the guy's capable of having big games from deep. He was 6 for 8 versus Charlotte, had 35 fantasy points, 5 for 9 versus Boston at 36 fantasy points. This is one of those games where I think he can hit his threes. The guy's a pretty good scorer, so wouldn't hate the idea of using Joe Harris just because of this in-game environment. You could also look at Lonzo Ball, which I'm not a big Lonzo Ball guy, but Brooklyn is 27th versus point guards. Now the problem is the minutes aren't that secure because he's coming off the bench. 26 points, 15 points, 27 points, 20 points, not that great. Although I do remember he had a huge game versus Phoenix, but he had 43 minutes, 54 fantasy points. That's more likely he's going to be his high scoring game of the season. At 5K, he's cheap, so I do like the price point. It's hard to trust him because the minutes aren't totally secure. So Lonzo Ball is more of a secondary play for me on this slate. I do like Josh Hart and Derrick Favors, though. Again, if you're just wanting to get exposure to this game, Josh Hart did have 31 minutes and 31 minutes the past 2 games, 24 points, 32 points. He should be a pretty safe bet for like 23 plus points in this game, and he's pretty cheap, like the matchup versus Brooklyn. So again, if you just want exposure to this game, Josh Hart's not a bad play. Derrick Favors isn't a bad play either, although it's his first. He's only had 2 games back from the death of his mother. Played 15 minutes and 20 minutes, so the minutes weren't huge, but I do have him for about 24 to 25 minutes tonight, expecting those minutes to ramp up a little bit. I just want exposure to this game, and even if he only does get 24 to 25 minutes, he is averaging over 1.1 points per minute on the season, and Brooklyn is 26 versus center, so it's not a bad matchup for Derrick Favors whatsoever, and he's pretty cheap. So I think you can get 25 to 30 points out of Derrick Favors if he sees 25 minutes tonight, so I wouldn't hate the idea of using Derrick Favors. And I think a guy that's going to be pretty popular tonight, sorry, lips are getting stuck, is going to be RJ Barrett at 4,500. He just seems a little too cheap here. Now, I know he's been pretty bad, but he's just too cheap and grades out as an excellent point per dollar option on my spreadsheet, and I assume on most people's projections as well. He's just very capable of sucking, though. 11 fantasy points in the last game in 36 minutes, 16 points in 31 minutes. Overtime versus Golden State, he had 46 minutes, 44 fantasy points, and then 10 points before that, 31, 27, 5. So he's way up and down. We don't know really what we're going to get, but this is his cheapest price point I believe we've had all season, and it's by a lot. He saw a 900 salary decrease since his last game, so I do like buying low on players. And at 4,500, he does not have to do much to hit value. He's going to see 30 plus minutes in this game, and it's a good matchup versus Atlanta. They are 24th versus shooting guard. So RJ Barrett at 4,500, he is a pretty strong point per dollar option on this slate as of right now. And the lowest I would go at this moment is Jackson Hayes. He comes in at 3,800, I believe. Yeah, Jackson Hayes, 3,800. So he's as low as I'd go right now, and I currently have him for about 25 minutes tonight. Man, he's been at about 0.9 points per minute, so just a little bit less than a point per minute on the season. And I just love to get some cheap exposure to this game, and Brooklyn sucks versus big man. They're bottom 5 in the league versus them. We did see 28 minutes in the last game versus Orlando, had 24 points. I think he can, if he gets 25 minutes tonight, I think he can get you 20 plus points at 3,800, with the upside of more in a good spot versus Brooklyn. So I don't mind Jackson Hayes on this slate. So guys, that's going to be it for this video. Pretty much, if you just got the idea of this video, I want exposure to this Brooklyn-New Orleans game. I think that's going to be the place to go. It's going to be the popular place to go, but I do think it's the right place to go as well. And then I have the Atlanta-New York game right below that. Anyway, guys, hope this video was helpful. If it was, remember to leave a like. If you're new to the channel, please hit the subscribe button. Really helps me out. Really appreciate it. Also follow me on Twitter at ChrisPennell16, and I'll see you guys in the next video.